The official story is simple. On August 16th, 1977, the world lost its king. And Elvis Presley, just 42 years old, was found dead at his Graceland home in Memphis, Tennessee. The cause was cardiac arrest. A life of fame, pressure, and excess had finally caught up with him. Millions mourned. The music stopped. But did it? Almost immediately, the story started to fray at the edges. Small inconsistencies, odd details, a whisper that grew into a global theory. While people started seeing him at a Burger King in Michigan, in the background of a movie, at his own home. At first, it was a joke. Then, for some, it became a serious investigation, a belief. The numbers are staggering. Even today, polls suggest millions of people, perhaps as many as 7% of Americans, think there's a chance Elvis never died. Why? Why does this story refuse to go away? It's not just about a few blurry photos or wishful thinking. It's a complex puzzle made of strange facts, official documents, eyewitness accounts, and a deep-seated feeling that the story we were told just doesn't add up. It's about a man who was so big, so iconic, that his death felt impossible. Maybe, for some it was. So what if the story we know is the real fiction? What if the king simply left the building and never looked back? Number 18 was that really Elvis in a Hollywood movie? The internet loves a good mystery, and in the 1990s, a strange one started to circulate about a very famous Christmas movie. The film was Home Alone, released in 1990, 13 years after Elvis Presley supposedly died. The theory centers on a single scene. It's when Catherine O'Hara's character, Kate McAllister, is desperately trying to get a flight back to Chicago from Scranton, Pennsylvania. She's arguing with a ticket agent, completely frazzled, and standing right behind her in the queue is a man. This man is the focus of it all. He's bearded, wearing a turtleneck and a sports coat. He looks a bit like Elvis might have looked if he'd aged into his 50s. He has the same thick hair, the same strong jawline, and he does something peculiar. As Kate gets upset, he seems to lean in, almost cocking his head as if he recognizes her or is listening intently. And then he makes a little gesture with his hand. Believers swear this is him. They say the gesture, the tilt of the head, it's all pure Elvis. The theory exploded, websites were created, videos were made, zooming in, slowing down the footage. People compared the man's profile to photos of Elvis from the 70s. They argued that the eye shape, the nose, the way he carried himself, it was all a perfect match. Why would he be an extra in a movie? The theory goes that he was bored. He missed the spotlight, just a little. So he decided to have some fun, to put a little clue out there for his most loyal fans. A secret wave from beyond the grave. The director of Home Alone, Chris Columbus, has been asked about this many times over the years. He's been consistent. He says it's not Elvis. He finds the whole thing amusing. In an interview for the film's 25th anniversary, he explained that he personally directed the scene, and the man in question was just an extra named Gary Richard Grott, who he had also worked with on another film. He even said that Grott passed away a few years after the movie was made. Case closed, right? Not for the believers. They argue that Hollywood is full of secrets. They say, of course, the director would deny it. It's all part of the plan. They point out that a death certificate for Gary Richard Grott has been hard to find, fueling more speculation. They claim the name itself could be a code. Some even suggest that Elvis was friends with the film's star, Macaulay Culkin, though there's no evidence of this. The theory lives on, a testament to how much people want to find him, even in the most unlikely of places. It shows that, for some, seeing is believing, no matter what the official story says. The image of that man in the airport is frozen in time, a permanent what-if in a beloved family film. So, why does this specific sighting persist despite the director's clear denial? If the man was just a local extra, why has no family member ever come forward with a photo to definitively put the rumor to rest? And in a world of digital information, why is the true identity of a background actor in one of the biggest movies of all time still a matter of debate? Number 17 was a masked singer. Really the king in disguise? In the late 1970s, just as the world was getting used to the idea of Elvis being gone, a new voice appeared. A mysterious singer who sounded almost exactly like him. He wore a mask. He called himself Orion. And he was signed to Sun Records, the very same label that first launched Elvis Presley into stardom. The story was too perfect to ignore. His real name was Jimmy Ellis, a man from Alabama with a naturally gifted voice that was a dead ringer for Elvis. For years, he tried to make it as a singer, but he was always told he sounded too much like the king. It was a curse, but after 1977, that curse became a potential goldmine. A novelist named Gail Brewer Giorgio wrote a book called Orion about a rock star who fakes his own death to escape the pressures of fame. The book's cover featured a drawing of a masked singer. The author and Shelby Singleton, the man who now owns Sun Records, saw an opportunity. They brought Jimmy Ellis in and turned him into the fictional character. Orion was born. The marketing was brilliant and ambiguous. They never said Orion was Elvis. But they never said he wasn't. His album covers had taglines like, "A voice that is hauntingly familiar, and his face is hidden, his voice is not." He performed in a sparkling ornate mask, never showing his face. The illusion was powerful. For fans desperate for a sign, this was it. Here was a man with Elvis's voice, on Elvis's original record label, living out a story about faking his own death. It felt less like a tribute and more like a confession. The whole phenomenon was documented in the 2015 film Orion, the Man Who Would Be King. And it showed how Ellis was trapped by the persona. He had the voice, but he had to hide his face. He was famous, but only as a shadow of someone else. He played along with the mystery, enjoying the fame it brought him, but it was a gilded cage. Fans would scream Elvis at his concerts. They would try to rip his mask off. They truly believed they were in the presence of the returned king. The Orion character released several albums and had a decent following, but the gimmick could only last so long. Eventually, Jimmy Ellis revealed his identity, but by then, the momentum was gone. He was no longer a mystery. He was just a talented singer who sounded like Elvis. Tragically, Jimmy Ellis was murdered in 1998 during a robbery at his pawn shop. But the Orion story remains a key chapter in the Elvis is Alive saga. It proved one thing very clearly: the public was ready and willing to believe. The story of a star faking his death wasn't just a fantasy for a few years. It felt like it was playing out in real time, right on stage. It blurred the line between tribute, exploitation, and a genuine conspiracy. Could a record label, even one as legendary as Sun, really build a campaign around such a massive deception if there wasn't some truth to it? Why did so many people who knew Elvis's voice intimately believe that Orion was the real deal, not just a sound-alike? And what does it say about our need to believe that a man in a mask could so easily convince thousands that a miracle had happened? Number 16, whose voice was on that secret recording? In 1981, a recording began to circulate. It was a fuzzy, amateur-sounding tape of a phone conversation. On it, a man's voice, a voice that sounds eerily like a 50-year-old Elvis Presley, is heard reflecting on his life, his music, and his decision to step away from it all. He talks about being happy, about reading and traveling. He mentions he still sees his daughter, Lisa Marie. For believers, this tape became a holy grail. It was proof. It was Elvis speaking from his self-imposed exile. The story behind the tape is that a woman named Linda Hood Sigmund secretly recorded a conversation she had with him. She claimed to have a connection and that he trusted her enough to call. The tape became a sensation in the underground world of Elvis researchers. It was analyzed by voice experts, both amateur and professional. Some were convinced. One such expert, L.G. Kirsta, who had reportedly worked with the FBI, analyzed the recording and concluded there was a high probability it was Elvis. He compared the voice patterns, the pitch, the unique vocal tics to known recordings of Elvis speaking. His verdict added a layer of scientific credibility to the theory. The tape's content was just as compelling as the voice. The man on the recording sounds tired but content. He discusses philosophy and his love for the book Autobiography of a Yogi, a known favorite of Elvis's, where he talks about the freedom he now enjoys. It's exactly what fans wanted to believe, that Elvis had found peace away from the madness of his life. The tape was not a public release. It spread from fan to fan, a secret whispered among the faithful. This made it feel more authentic, less like a commercial hoax, and more like a genuine leak. Of course, the tape also has many doubters. Skeptics point out that tape recordings can be manipulated. They argue that a talented impersonator could easily fake a phone call. They question the credentials of the voice experts who authenticated it. The name of the man who supposedly analyzed it for the FBI has been questioned, with some researchers unable to verify his history. And the woman who made the recording, Linda Hood Sigmund, has been a controversial figure. The tape's origin story is murky, relying entirely on her word, but the power of the recording remains. It's one thing to see a blurry photo, it's another to hear the voice. The voice was his instrument, his signature. To hear it sounding older, wiser, and alive, years after his death, was a powerful experience for many. It was personal, it felt real. The tape represents a different kind of evidence, not visual but auditory. It bypasses the rational brain and speaks directly to the part of a fan that knows every nuance of that famous Southern drawl. If the tape is a fake, who is the impersonator with such a perfect grasp of not just Elvis's singing voice, but his unique speaking patterns? Why go to the trouble of creating such a long, philosophical conversation instead of a simple hello? And if the voice analysis was legitimate, why have the findings not been more widely accepted, or, for that matter, more rigorously challenged by mainstream science? At number 15, why did his own father seem so unsure? Vernon Presley was a quiet man. He was Elvis's father, his business manager, the person who handled the money in the estate. He was a man who had just lost his only son, but his behavior in the days and weeks after August 16th, 1977, struck many people as odd. He seemed distant, calm, almost detached, and in one famous interview, he said something that has fueled conspiracy theories ever since. Just a day or two after Elvis's death, Vernon gave an interview to the press from the steps of Graceland. He looked tired and sad as any grieving father would, but he didn't seem destroyed. He was composed. Some people saw this as the quiet dignity of a man from a generation that didn't show emotion publicly. But others saw it as a sign that he wasn't truly grieving a death, but perhaps something else. A departure. A long goodbye. The most quoted and analyzed part of this period is a comment Vernon allegedly made. According to some reports, he told a journalist that people shouldn't judge Elvis too harshly, and that Elvis would probably explain his actions in his own book someday. The implication was stunning. How could a dead man write a book to explain his actions? And to believers, this wasn't a slip of the tongue from a grieving father. It was a clue. A carefully worded message from the one man who would have been essential to any plan for Elvis to disappear. Then there was the matter of the will. Vernon was the executor of Elvis's estate. He moved quickly to secure Graceland and Elvis's finances. Some researchers claim that he seemed more focused on the business of death than the reality of it. There were also stories from people within the inner circle that Vernon had a strange sense of calm about him, which was uncharacteristic. The author Gail Brewer Giorgio, in her book Is Elvis Alive?, placed a lot of emphasis on the behavior of the family, particularly Vernon. She argued that their reactions were not consistent with a sudden tragic death. Skeptics have a simple explanation. Vernon Presley was in shock. He was a 61-year-old man who had just found his son dead. People react to grief in different ways. His calm demeanor could have been a coping mechanism. The supposed quote about Elvis writing a book is also difficult to verify. It appeared in some tabloid reports, but is absent from major news coverage of the time. It could easily be an urban legend, a misquote that got repeated until it became fact in the minds of many. Furthermore, Vernon himself died just 2 years later in 1979, reportedly of a broken heart. This doesn't fit the narrative of a man who knew his son was alive and well. Still, the image of Vernon, the steady hand behind the Elvis empire, acting so strangely, is a powerful one. He was the ultimate insider. If Elvis wanted to fake his death, he couldn't have done it without his father's help. And Vernon's role would have been to manage the aftermath, to sell the story, to protect the secret. For those who believe, Vernon's quiet composure wasn't a sign of shock. It was the look of a man carrying the weight of the world's biggest secret. Why would a father, even one in deep shock, use language that suggested his son was still alive and would one day return to explain himself? If Vernon was a key part of the plan, what was the emotional toll on him in those final 2 years of his own life? And could his own early death have been caused not by grief, but by the immense stress of maintaining such a monumental lie? Number 14, what was in the book he was reading? When Elvis Presley was found on that bathroom floor, what was the last thing on his mind? The details of the scene have been analyzed for decades, and one small detail often stands out. On the floor near him, or on his bedside table, depending on the account, was a book. It wasn't a novel or a magazine, it was a book about faking one's own death. The book in question is The Passover Plot by Hugh J. Schonfield. It was first published in 1965. The book presents a controversial theory that Jesus of Nazareth did not die on the cross. Instead, Schonfield argues that Jesus was a messianic figure who planned his own death and resurrection. The idea was to use a drug to simulate death, be taken down from the cross, and then be revived later, thus fulfilling the prophecies in a way he could control. The plan went wrong, according to the book, leading to his actual death. The fact that Elvis was reading this specific book on the day he died is for many more than a coincidence. It's a roadmap. Elvis was a deeply spiritual man. He was fascinated by religion, philosophy, and the afterlife. He was known to read countless books on these subjects, but this one was different. It wasn't just about spirituality, it was about the mechanics of a great deception. It was about a famous figure engineering his own disappearance to fulfill a greater purpose. Believers in the alive theory see a direct parallel. Elvis was trapped by his fame, by his demanding schedule, by the Memphis Mafia of hangers-on, by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. He was a prisoner in a gold-plated cage. What if he saw a way out? What if, inspired by the ideas in this book, he decided to stage his own death to escape it all? He had the money, the resources, and a circle of loyal people who could help him. He could be taken away, revived, and then live out his days in quiet anonymity. This theory is supported by Elvis's known interests. He was a student of the occult and esoteric knowledge. He met with spiritual gurus like Swami Sri Yukteswar, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi. He was searching for something more than fame and fortune. The idea of a spiritual retreat, a shedding of his old life, is very much in line with his character in his later years. Reading a book about a meticulously planned fake death at the very moment of his own seems like a message from the man himself. Of course, there is a counter-argument. Elvis read constantly and widely. He could have been reading dozens of books at that time. The Passover plot might have been just one among many, its presence a simple coincidence. He was also known to be in poor health, and his death, while tragic, was not entirely unexpected by those close to him. The idea of him having the physical and mental clarity to pull off such a complex plan at that stage of his life seems unlikely to many. But for others, the book is the key. It's the intellectual blueprint for his escape. If his reading choice was just a coincidence, what are the odds of it being that specific book on that specific day? Could he have been studying not just the idea, but the potential pitfalls of such a plan, learning from the mistakes described in the book? And is it possible the book wasn't just for him, but was left behind intentionally as the first clue for those he knew would come looking for the truth? Number 13Y was a black helicopter at Graceland. In the hours immediately following the discovery of Elvis's body, Graceland was a scene of chaos. Paramedics, police, family, and staff were rushing around. The world's media was beginning to descend on Memphis. Amidst all this confusion, a strange event supposedly took place. An unmarked black helicopter allegedly landed on the grounds of Graceland, stayed for a short time, and then took off. This story is one of the cornerstones of the Elvis faked his death theory. The helicopter is seen as the getaway vehicle. The official activity at the front of the house was all a distraction. While everyone was focused on the ambulance and the unfolding tragedy, Elvis, alive and well, was quietly escorted to the helicopter at the back of the property and flown away to a new life. Who was flying the helicopter? The theories range from the CIA to a private security firm hired by Elvis himself. This theory was heavily promoted by Bill Bixby on his infamous 1990s TV specials that investigated the conspiracy like the Elvis Files. Eyewitness accounts were presented, though they have always been difficult to verify. People claim to have seen it. The image is compelling: a sleek, mysterious aircraft, the kind associated with secret government operations, swooping in to extract a high-value asset. It adds a layer of intrigue and professionalism to the escape plan. It suggests this wasn't a last-minute decision, but a carefully coordinated operation. Why would the government be involved? This ties into another branch of the theory that Elvis was working as an undercover federal agent. It sounds far-fetched, but there are breadcrumbs. Elvis famously met with President Richard Nixon in 1970 and was given an honorary badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, a forerunner to the DEA. He was a vocal patriot who despised the drug culture he saw destroying America. The theory goes that his work as an informant put him in danger, and the faked death was his entry into a form of witness protection program. The black helicopter in this version was his official government transport. The official story, of course, contains no mention of a helicopter. The Memphis Police Department reports from the day don't include it. The many biographies written by people who were there, like his stepbrother David Stanley or his road manager Joe Esposito, don't mention a helicopter landing. Skeptics argue the story was simply invented after the fact to add drama to the conspiracy. In a time of panic and confusion, people's memories can be unreliable. A news helicopter flying overhead could easily be misremembered as something more sinister. But the story persists because it answers a crucial question: how did he get away? It provides the missing piece of the logistical puzzle. Without a clear exit strategy, the theory of a faked death is much harder to believe. The black helicopter provides that exit. It's clean, it's fast, and it's secret. It turns a chaotic medical emergency into a smooth, covert extraction. If the helicopter was just a news chopper, why have so many different people claimed it was an unmarked military-style craft? Like, if it was a government operation, what could Elvis have known that would make him valuable enough for such an elaborate rescue? And if multiple people saw this event, why was it never reported by the mainstream media gathered at the gates of Graceland that day? Number 12. Why has the life insurance policy never been cashed? Money leaves a trail. In the case of a person's death, one of the biggest financial events is the payout of a life insurance policy. It's a standard procedure. A death certificate is produced, and the beneficiary receives the money. But, according to some investigators, there's a major problem with Elvis's case. A very large life insurance policy, supposedly taken out with Lloyd's of London, has never been claimed. This claim was a central point made by Gail Brewer Giorgio in her 1988 bestseller, Is Elvis Alive? She and other researchers alleged that they had contacted Lloyd's of London to inquire about the policy. They were reportedly told that the policy was still active and had not been paid out. The implication is enormous. A life insurance policy cannot be paid out without official proof of death. If the policy is still sitting there, unclaimed, it suggests that the insurance underwriters at Lloyd's do not have satisfactory proof that Elvis Presley is actually deceased. Think about the logic. The Elvis estate was not in great shape when he died. While he made a lot of money, he also spent a lot. His father, Vernon, was trying to consolidate the estate's finances. A multi-million-dollar insurance payout would have been a huge help. Why would the estate simply leave that money on the table? The only logical reason, believers argue, is that they couldn't collect it. And they couldn't collect it because Elvis was still alive. To file a claim would be insurance fraud, a serious federal crime. This piece of evidence feels different from a blurry photo or a strange quote. It feels concrete, it's about corporate paperwork and financial regulations. Lloyd's of London is one of the oldest and most respected insurance markets in the world. They are meticulous about their investigations. They don't pay out massive claims without being 100% certain. The estate's refusal to claim is seen by some as a quiet official admission that something is wrong with the official story of his death. However, trying to verify this claim is incredibly difficult. Lloyd's of London is famously discreet. They do not comment on the private policies of their clients. So the evidence for this claim often comes from the conspiracy researchers themselves. Skeptics argue that the story is likely a fabrication or a misunderstanding. Perhaps the policy never existed, or perhaps it was a different type of policy, one that didn't pay out for certain causes of death, like those related to prescription drug use. It's also possible the policy was claimed quietly, without public announcement. But the idea is powerful because it suggests that the deception goes far beyond the public. It implies that even the cold, hard world of international finance has been unable to officially close the book on Elvis Presley. It suggests there's a paper trail, or a lack of one, sitting in a vault in London that proves the king is still out there. For the believers, it's not just a smoking gun, it's a legally binding document that says the story isn't over. If such a valuable policy exists and remains unclaimed, why hasn't the estate ever publicly explained this financial anomaly? Could the terms of the policy have a clause that makes it void in the case of a staged death, forcing the family to choose between the money and the secret? Or is it possible that Elvis himself is the beneficiary and he is simply waiting for the right time to claim his own policy? It's number 11. Who was the man on the flight to Buenos Aires? The day after Elvis died, on August 17, 1977, a strange thing happened at Memphis International Airport. A man who looked remarkably like Elvis Presley reportedly walked up to a ticket counter. He bought a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires, Argentina. He paid in cash, and the name he used was John Burroughs. This is not just some random name. John Burroughs, sometimes spelled John, was an alias Elvis used for years. It was his go-to pseudonym for booking hotels, flights, and anything else he wanted to do without attracting attention. Members of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, have confirmed this in numerous interviews and books. It was his personal code name. So for a man looking just like him to use that specific name at that specific time is more than a little suspicious. The story goes that the ticket agent was stunned. He saw the resemblance, heard the name, and his mind started racing. But what could he do? He sold the ticket, the man took it and walked away. Buenos Aires was a perfect destination for someone looking to disappear in the 1970s. It was a place where a person with a lot of cash could live well, far from the prying eyes of the American media. At the time, Argentina was also a country that did not have an extradition treaty with the United States, making it a safe haven. This sighting is one of the most compelling because it's so specific. It has a time, a place, a name, and a destination. It provides a narrative for the escape. He didn't just vanish into thin air from Graceland. He followed a plan. He drove to the airport, used his old, trusted alias, and boarded a flight to a new life in South America. Some versions of the story even claim he was with a couple of other men, presumably aides helping him with his escape. This event has been featured in countless documentaries and books on the subject. It's often presented as the first concrete proof that Elvis was on the move. Why would an impersonator use the name John Burroughs? At that time, in 1977, Elvis's use of that alias was not common public knowledge. It was insider information, so the person using the name was either Elvis himself or someone with very close connections to him. The counterarguments are predictable but valid. There is no physical evidence. No ticket stub has ever surfaced. No airline has a record of the transaction, though a cash purchase in 1977 would have left a minimal paper trail. The story relies entirely on an eyewitness account, which can be unreliable, especially in a moment when the entire city of Memphis was buzzing with the news of Elvis's death. It could have been a prankster. It could have been a grieving fan who happened to look like Elvis and was also an avid researcher. Or the story could be a complete fabrication invented to sell books and TV shows. But the specificity of the alias, John Burroughs, is the sticking point. It feels too real, too detailed to be a simple mistake. It connects the dots between Elvis, the superstar, and a man trying to become a ghost, using a name that had always been his shield against the world. If the man at the airport was not Elvis, how did he know to use that specific semi-secret alias just hours after the news broke? Why choose a one-way ticket to a country known as a place to hide? And if the ticket was real, is there a passenger manifest from a flight to Buenos Aires on August 17th or 18th, 1977, with the name John Burroughs still sitting in an airline archive somewhere? Number 10, why was the casket so heavy and sweaty? The public viewing of Elvis's body took place at Graceland on August 17th, 1977. Thousands of mourners filed past the open casket to pay their last respects. Yeah, it was a hot, humid Tennessee day, and something about the body in the casket seemed wrong. Very wrong. Two main anomalies were reported by numerous people who were there, and they were later amplified by a famous photograph. The first was the weight. The casket was incredibly heavy. It took a large group of pallbearers, including Elvis's friends like Joe Esposito and his cousin Billy Smith, to carry it. They were visibly straining. Elvis's weight had fluctuated, but was he so heavy that it would require that much effort? The theory suggests the casket contained more than just a body. It also held a heavy-duty air conditioning and refrigeration unit. Why would it need that? This connects to the second, more famous anomaly. The body looked waxy and was seemingly sweating. A now infamous photograph of the body in the casket was secretly taken by one of Elvis's relatives and sold to the National Enquirer. The cover of their September 6, 1977 issue became one of the best-selling of all time. In the photo, the face looks puffy and unnatural, almost like a mask. Some people who were there claimed they saw beads of sweat on the body's forehead and upper lip. The conclusion drawn by believers is simple, and chilling the body in the casket was not Elvis Presley. It was a carefully crafted wax dummy. The extreme weight of the casket was due to the cooling system needed to keep the wax figure from melting in the Memphis heat. The sweat was not sweat at all. It was the wax beginning to soften and melt under the hot lights and the crush of body heat from the thousands of mourners. This theory explains a lot of things. It explains why some of Elvis's closest friends reportedly said things like, "That doesn't look like him." It explains the waxy, doll-like appearance in the Enquirer photo. His nose looked different, his eyebrows seemed arched in a way that wasn't natural. It was a close resemblance, but it was off. A wax figure, no matter how well made, would have these subtle imperfections. The official explanation for these observations is quite different. The body's appearance was the result of a difficult and possibly rushed embalming process on a body that had suffered a major medical trauma. The puffiness was due to the effects of the cardiac event and the medications in his system. The sweat could have been fluid seepage, a known phenomenon with embalmed bodies, especially in high humidity. As for the weight, Elvis had gained a significant amount of weight in his final years. A man of his size plus the weight of a heavy copper-lined casket would indeed be extremely difficult to lift and carry. His own father, Vernon, chose the casket, and it was the top of the line, 900-pound copper deposit casket. But the image of a melting wax dummy is a powerful one. It suggests a level of planning and deception that is almost cinematic. It means that the conspirators had to have a perfect wax replica of Elvis ready to go at a moment's notice. It also means that every single person who filed past that casket was part of an elaborate piece of theater, mourning a wax doll while the real man was already on his way to a new life. Could a sufficiently realistic wax dummy have been procured or created in the few hours between his discovery and the public viewing? If it was a real body, why did so many people, including those who knew him best, feel that something was fundamentally wrong with his appearance? And what happens to the alleged cooling unit inside the casket after the burial? Number 9. What did his doctor really know? Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, was Elvis Presley's personal physician for the last decade of his life. He was there on the day Elvis died. He signed the initial death certificate, and he was a central figure in the controversy and legal battles that followed. But his statements and actions over the years have often raised more questions than answers. Dr. Nick was the man who prescribed the vast quantities of drugs that Elvis took. After Elvis's death, he was investigated by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners and was eventually indicted on charges of overprescribing medication, though he was acquitted. His defense was always that he was trying to help Elvis to control his intake by being the sole provider rather than have Elvis seek drugs from dangerous street sources. He maintained that he always acted in his patient's best interest, but in the context of the Alive theory, Dr. Nick's role is re-examined. What if he wasn't just a permissive doctor? What if he was a key facilitator of the escape plan? He had the medical knowledge and the access to create a believable death scene. He could have administered a drug that would put Elvis into a deep coma-like state, mimicking death. This is known as the suspended animation theory. Elvis would appear dead to a cursory examination. Dr. Nick could then sign the death certificate, and Elvis could be moved before a full, rigorous autopsy could be performed. There are details that support this. Dr. Nick, in his 2010 book, The King and Dr. Nick, made some startling claims. He said he believed Elvis was suffering from a chronic, painful, and incurable bone disease. He also revealed that in the months before his death, Elvis was planning a radical new phase of his life. He wanted to quit performing, travel the world, and study religion in Europe or the Middle East. This desire to escape and start over, coming directly from his doctor, adds weight to the idea that he was looking for a way out. Furthermore, Dr. Nick's own words have sometimes been ambiguous. In some interviews, he has seemed to hint that there is more to the story than the public knows. He was a man caught between his duty to his patient, his legal troubles, and a public hungry for answers. For believers, his actions look less like those of a guilty doctor covering his tracks, and more like a loyal friend protecting a monumental secret. He provided the medical cover story that made the entire disappearance possible. Skeptics point out that Dr. Nick's reputation was on the line. His later statements in his book could be seen as an attempt to reframe his role in Elvis's life to portray himself more sympathetically. And his acquittal in court doesn't change the fact that the medical examiner's report found a dozen different prescription drugs in Elvis's system. The evidence for a drug-related death is strong. The idea of a perfectly timed, medically induced coma that fools multiple paramedics and medical professionals is seen as highly improbable. Yet, Dr. Nick remains a puzzle. He was the one person with the means, motive, and opportunity to medically stage a death. He had the trust of Elvis and the family. His proximity to the event, combined with his own later revelations about Elvis's state of mind, makes him a pivotal figure. If Elvis really died from an overdose, was Dr. Nick's role one of gross negligence, or something more deliberate? Could he have possessed the knowledge of drugs that could simulate death so perfectly that it would fool the initial examiners? And when he wrote his book decades later, was he finally trying to tell the truth between the lines, giving clues to the fans he knew were still searching? Number 8. Why are there so many sightings? Perhaps the most persistent and widespread reason people believe Elvis is alive is the simplest: they think they've seen him. The sheer volume of Elvis sightings since 1977 is a cultural phenomenon in itself. It's not just one or two isolated incidents, it's thousands of reports from all over the world, spanning decades. The most famous early sighting happened in Kalamazoo, Michigan, in the late 1980s. A woman claimed she saw Elvis at a local Burger King. This story was picked up by the media and became a national joke, but for some it was serious. The woman, Louise Welling, gave a detailed account. She said he came in, ordered a Whopper, and sat down. She was certain it was him. Soon after, another sighting was reported at a supermarket in Vicksburg, Mississippi. The stories started to pile up. These weren't just fleeting glimpses. People provided details. He was seen at a gas station in California looking fit and healthy. He was spotted at a theme park in Sweden. He was supposedly a regular at a small diner in his home state of Tennessee. The sightings created a mythology of Elvis as a man of the people, living a simple, anonymous life. He had shed the gilded cage of Graceland for the freedom of a Burger King booth. The 1980s and 90s were the golden age of Elvis sightings, heavily fueled by tabloid newspapers like the Weekly World News, which seemed to report a new sighting in every issue. They published grainy photos of an older, gray-haired man who resembled Elvis. One famous photo showed him supposedly in a federal witness protection program. Another showed him with a cast on his arm after a supposed motorcycle accident. These stories, while sensational, kept the idea alive in the public consciousness. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon. They often attribute it to a form of collective wish fulfillment. Dr. John Allen Paulos, a mathematician and author, has discussed the statistical probability of Elvis sightings. With millions of people in the world, and many who bear a passing resemblance to Elvis, it is statistically inevitable that some of them will be misidentified as him, especially by people who want to believe. It's also connected to the psychology of grief. For a figure as beloved as Elvis, his sudden death was a trauma for many fans. Seeing him alive is a way of denying that trauma, of refusing to let go. It's a manifestation of the phrase, "The king is dead, long live the king." But for the believers, it's not about psychology, it's about evidence. They argue that while many sightings might be fake or mistaken, you only need one of them to be real. They point to patterns. The sightings often describe a man who is healthy, sometimes with graying hair, and who seems peaceful. He is often spotted in small, out-of-the-way places, consistent with someone trying to keep a low profile. The Kalamazoo sighting became the subject of a book, The Elvis Burger King Connection, which treated it as a serious lead. The sheer number and consistency of the sightings are hard to dismiss entirely, even for skeptics. It's a global folktale that refuses to die, passed on through newspaper clippings, internet forums, and word of mouth. Each story adds another layer to the legend of the man who walked away from it all. If all the thousands of sightings are just cases of mistaken identity, why do so many of them share similar details about his appearance and demeanor? With modern technology like facial recognition, has anyone ever seriously tried to track down the people in the most convincing sighting photos? And what if among all the hoaxes and mistakes, there was one genuine encounter, a brief moment when the mask of anonymity slipped? Number 7, why did he want his grave to be so quiet? Elvis Presley is buried at Graceland in an area he had designed called the Meditation Garden. He lies next to his mother Gladys, his father Vernon, and his grandmother Minnie Mae. It is one of the most visited graves in the world, but there's a detail about Elvis's wishes for his final resting place that supporters of the alive theory find very significant. According to some of his closest friends and family, Elvis never wanted a big public memorial. He was a spiritual man, but also a private one in many ways. He reportedly told people that if anything ever happened to him, he wanted to be buried next to his mother in a simple, quiet ceremony. His mother's grave was at Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis. That is where Elvis was initially buried on August 18th, 1977. Just 2 months later, in October, something strange happened. The bodies of Elvis and his mother were exhumed from the cemetery and moved to the Meditation Garden at Graceland. The official reason given was security. There had been an alleged attempt by a group of men to steal Elvis's body from his mausoleum at Forest Hill and hold it for ransom. To prevent any future incidents, the family decided to move the graves to the secure private grounds of Graceland. But believers in the fake death theory have a different interpretation. They see the move as a crucial part of the plan. A public cemetery is subject to public records and regulations. a private grave on your own property is much easier to control. The story of the attempted grave robbing, they argue, was a convenient excuse. No one was ever convicted of the crime, and the details have always been murky. It provided the perfect cover story for what they were really doing, removing the evidence. What evidence? The empty casket, or the casket containing a wax dummy. By moving the burial site to Graceland, the conspirators could ensure that no one could ever get a court order to exhume the body for a future investigation. The grave is now on private property, making it almost impossible to access without the estate's permission. It's the ultimate hiding place, right out in the open. Millions of people visit it every year, never suspecting that it might be a decoy. This theory is also supported by the idea that Elvis would never have wanted his final resting place to become a tourist attraction. The quiet, simple burial he supposedly desired is the complete opposite of the reality at Graceland today. The move to Graceland wasn't about honoring his wishes. It was about controlling the narrative and securing the secret. It was a strategic move and a long-term deception. The official account is, of course, that the family was genuinely concerned about security. The threat of grave robbing was real, and moving the bodies to Graceland was the most logical solution. It allowed them to protect the graves and also create a place where fans could safely pay their respects. The creation of the meditation garden as the final resting place is seen by the estate as a beautiful tribute, not a cover-up. Still, the sequence of events is suspicious. The initial burial in a public place, followed by a convenient security threat, and then a move to a private, controlled location. It seems almost too perfect. It closed a major loophole in the plan, ensuring that the contents of that grave would forever remain a mystery. Was the attempted grave robbing a real threat, or was it a staged event designed to justify moving the bodies? By placing the grave on private land, did the family effectively seal the secret forever, making any future forensic investigation impossible? And what if the real reason for the move was not to bring Elvis home, but to remove the last piece of physical evidence that could unravel the entire story? Number 6, what was the motive for disappearing? Why would Elvis Presley, the most famous entertainer in the world, want to fake his own death? To understand the theory, you have to understand the man's life in 1977, and it was not a happy one. The motive is perhaps the most compelling part of the entire conspiracy. Elvis was sick. He was overweight, dependent on a dizzying array of prescription drugs, and suffering from a host of ailments, from high blood pressure to an enlarged colon. His live performances, once legendary for their energy, had become sad spectacles. He would forget lyrics, slur his words, and was often visibly bloated and unwell. The king was dying a slow, public death on stage. He was also deeply in debt, or at least his finances were a mess. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, took an unprecedented 50% of his earnings. The cost of maintaining his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, and his lavish lifestyle was enormous. He was trapped on a treadmill of touring and making movies he hated just to pay the bills. He was a product, a corporation, and he had lost control of his own life. Then, there was the personal danger. Elvis had received death threats throughout his career. His fame made him a constant target. But there was another, darker theory. Some believe Elvis had become involved with a criminal organization. A book called Elvis, What Happened? Written by 3 of his former bodyguards and published just before his death, aired all of his dirty laundry, including his drug use and bizarre behavior. It was a betrayal that devastated him. This theory suggests that his connections to a shadowy group known as the Fraternity, a racketeering enterprise, had put him in serious jeopardy. Faking his death was the only way to escape their reach. This is the version of the story where Elvis cooperates with the FBI, trading information for a new identity. So, the motives were powerful and plentiful. He could escape his failing health and get well in private. He could escape the financial control of Colonel Parker and the burden of his entourage. And he could escape a real physical threat to his life. By dying, Elvis Presley the icon could be laid to rest, allowing Elvis the man to finally live. He could read his books, travel, and find the spiritual peace he was always searching for. This is the human element of the conspiracy. It's not just about clues and codes, it's about a man's desperate search for freedom. Biographies written after his death, like Peter Guralnick's acclaimed Careless Love, The Unmaking of Elvis Presley, paint a detailed picture of a deeply unhappy man in his final years. The idea that he would take a drastic step to escape is not just plausible, it's understandable. Of course, the counter-narrative is that he was simply too sick and too tired to pull off such a grand deception. His health was so poor that a sudden death was, sadly, the most likely outcome. He was trapped, yes, but he didn't have the energy or clarity of mind to engineer an escape. He was a victim of his own fame, not the master of a secret plan, but the motive remains the engine of the entire theory. Without a good reason to disappear, the rest of the clues fall apart. But Elvis had the best reasons in the world. He had fame, money, and adoration, but he had lost his health, his privacy, and his freedom. Faking his death was the only way to get them back. If he was so sick, could a faked death have been a form of medical retirement, a way to finally get the comprehensive, private health care he desperately needed? Was the threat from organized crime real, and was his disappearance an unofficial form of witness protection? Or was the primary motive simply spiritual, a desire to shed his worldly identity and pursue a life of quiet contemplation, just as he had read about in his many books? Number 5, why was the official investigation so flawed? The official cause of Elvis Presley's death was cardiac arrest, specifically a cardiac arrhythmia or an irregular heartbeat. But from the very beginning, the process of determining and announcing this cause was filled with confusion, contradictions, and what some see as a deliberate cover-up. The autopsy was conducted on the afternoon of August 16, 1977, at Baptist Memorial Hospital in Memphis. The team of pathologists was led by Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County Medical Examiner. Almost immediately, there were conflicting reports. Dr. Francisco held a press conference and announced that the death was due to heart disease and that drugs were not a major factor. He stated that the toxicology report would later confirm this. This story was immediately questioned by many, including the other doctors in the room. The evidence of extreme prescription drug use was overwhelming. One of the pathologists, Dr. Eric Muirhead, later said he was shocked by Dr. Francisco's public statement, as the team had not yet reached that conclusion. The toxicology report eventually did come back, and it was explosive. It showed significant levels of at least 10 different prescription drugs in Elvis's system, including high concentrations of codeine and quaaludes. It painted a clear picture of polypharmacy, the use of multiple drugs at once. So why did the medical examiner initially downplay the role of drugs? The theory is that he was pressured by Elvis's father, Vernon Presley. Vernon did not want his son's legacy to be tarnished by the stigma of a drug-related death. He wanted the world to remember Elvis as a hero, not an addict. According to this theory, a deal was made. The official cause of death would be a heart attack, a more dignified end for the king of rock and roll. This led to one of the most mysterious parts of the whole affair. Vernon Presley had the complete official autopsy report sealed. It was not to be made public for 50 years. That means the full medical details of Elvis's death will not be available until 2027. This single act has fueled more speculation than almost any other. What is in that report that is so damaging that it had to be hidden for half a century? Believers argue that the report is sealed, not to hide a drug overdose, but to hide the fact that there was no death at all. The report, if it were made public, would show medical inconsistencies that would prove he didn't die. The rush to announce a natural cause of death, the conflicting stories from the pathologists, and the sealing of the final report all point to a massive cover-up, orchestrated by the family to protect the secret of his escape. The more mainstream view is that the family was simply trying to protect Elvis's reputation from the ugly truth of his addiction. They were managing a sensitive public relations issue at a time of immense private grief. The sealing of the autopsy report, while unusual, was within their legal rights. And in 2014, some details from the report were reportedly revealed by a doctor who had seen it, confirming that Elvis was suffering from a wide range of severe health problems, which, combined with the drugs, made his death almost inevitable. But the damage was done. The initial handling of the post-mortem investigation created a cloud of suspicion that has never lifted. The official story seemed to be changing in real time, and the most important piece of evidence, the autopsy report, was locked away from public view. Why would a medical examiner make a public statement that was later contradicted by his own toxicology reports and his colleagues? If the family was only trying to hide a drug problem, why seal the entire report for 50 years, an act that would guarantee decades of speculation? And what explosive secret could be waiting in that report, scheduled to be revealed in 2027? Number 4, why were there no photos of the body? In the age of modern media, the death of a major celebrity is a documented event. There are usually official photos, police reports, and clear images available to the public. With Elvis Presley, one of the most photographed humans of the 20th century, there is a strange and total lack of official imagery of the death scene. Think about it. The Memphis police and paramedics were on the scene. A photographer from a major newspaper was also there. Yet, no official photograph of Elvis's body as it was found has ever been publicly released. There are no crime scene photos, no images of him being carried out of Graceland. The only visual evidence the public has ever seen is the single, grainy photograph of the body in the casket, which was taken secretly and sold to a tabloid. This absence of evidence is, for many, evidence in itself. Why the complete lockdown on photos? The theory is simple. You can't photograph a death scene if there wasn't one. If Elvis was alive and being whisked away by a helicopter, then the whole scene in the bathroom was staged. A body double might have been used, or perhaps the scene was secured so quickly that no real evidence could be gathered. A complete media blackout was enforced. This is highly unusual for an event of this magnitude. The death of a figure like Elvis would normally be subject to intense scrutiny. The lack of photos has led to speculation that the authorities were complicit in the cover-up. Perhaps the Memphis police and medical services were persuaded to look the other way, to not document the scene as they normally would. This ties back to the theory of government involvement. If this was an official operation, then a no photos order would have been standard procedure. The official explanation is that the family requested privacy. The police and paramedics were respectful of the family's grief and the dignity of the deceased. They secured the scene to keep the media out, not to hide a conspiracy. It was a private home, and they were trying to handle a tragic medical situation, not a public spectacle. The lack of photos is a sign of respect, not a sign of a cover-up, but compare this to other major celebrity deaths. In many cases, details and even photos eventually leak. With Elvis, the information lockdown has been almost total for over 40 years. This level of control is suspicious to many. It suggests a coordinated effort to prevent any visual evidence from emerging that might contradict the official narrative. If the body in the casket was a wax dummy, as some believe, then allowing photos of the real scene would be impossible. The two would not match. The vacuum of information created by the lack of photos has been filled with speculation. It allows people to imagine their own version of events. For believers, it's a clear sign that the entire event was a carefully managed piece of theater from which no unauthorized images were allowed to escape. In a situation involving, the most famous person on earth, how is it possible to enforce a complete photographic blackout with no leaks for over 4 decades? Was the respect for privacy the only reason, or were law enforcement and medical personnel given direct orders not to document what they saw? And what might a single clear photograph of the scene have revealed that would change the entire story? Number 3. Why does his middle name have 2 spellings? It's a small detail, a single letter. But on Elvis Presley's gravestone at Graceland, his name is carved in stone as Elvis Aaron Presley. This has become one of the most enduring and debated clues for those who believe he is still alive. Because, for most of his life, Elvis and his family spelled his middle name with one Aaron. His birth certificate says Elvis Aaron Presley. His army records say Aaron. His marriage license says Aaron. On countless official documents throughout his life, the spelling is consistent. Elvis himself signed his name as Elvis A. Presley. The spelling with 2 A's, Aaron, was something he reportedly adopted later in life. He was a spiritual man and knew that in the Bible the name of Moses' brother was spelled Aaron. He apparently liked that spelling better and expressed a desire to change it legally, but there is no definitive proof that he ever did so before he died. So why is the Aaron spelling on his official gravestone? The theory is that this is a deliberate signal. It's a message from Elvis and his family to the fans who look closely enough. By putting a wrong name on the grave, they are subtly indicating that the person buried there is not the real Elvis Presley. The logic is that Elvis, a man who was deeply attached to his family and his own identity, would never have allowed his name to be permanently misspelled on his own tombstone, especially next to his beloved mother. To misspell the name is to invalidate the grave. This detail was famously highlighted by the author Gail Brewer Giorgio. She argued that this was not a mistake, it was a clue intentionally left behind. It's a way for Elvis to communicate with his followers from beyond the grave, telling them that the whole thing is a sham. It's a clever, permanent, and deniable way to signal the truth. Anyone who questions it can simply be told it was his preferred spelling. But the fans who know his history, who have seen the documents, they would understand the deeper meaning. The official explanation from the Presley estate is that Aaron was indeed the spelling Elvis preferred and intended to use. His father, Vernon, who was in charge of the burial and the headstone, chose that spelling to honor his son's wishes. They see it as a final act of love and respect, not a secret code. They point out that names can have variant spellings and that Elvis had every right to choose how he wanted his own name spelled. To them, the controversy is a case of fans overthinking a simple, personal family decision. But for the believers, it's a fundamental error that cannot be so easily dismissed. It's on his grave, the one place where your name should be unequivocally correct. It's like a signature on a forged painting. It looks right at first glance, but to the expert eye, it's a clear sign of a fake. The fact that the debate continues to this day shows how powerful this one small detail has become. It's a permanent question mark carved in granite. Would a grieving father in the midst of tragedy be focused on an unofficial, preferred spelling of his son's middle name? If Elvis's legal name was Orion at the time of his death, isn't it a form of falsification to put Orion on his grave marker and death certificate? And what if the misspelling isn't just a clue, but a legal loophole? A way to argue that the person Elvis Aaron Presley, who is buried at Graceland, is technically a different person from the Elvis Aaron Presley, who was born in Tupelo. Number 2. What did his last girlfriend really see? Ginger Alden was Elvis Presley's last girlfriend. She was the one who found him unconscious on the bathroom floor on the afternoon of August 16, 1977. Her eyewitness account is one of the most crucial pieces of the official story. But over the years, she has made statements that are cryptic and have been interpreted by some as hints that things were not as they seemed. In her 2014 book, Elvis and Ginger, Alden described the discovery scene in detail. She said she found him slumped over in his pajamas and that it was clear something was terribly wrong. She called for help, and the chaos began. Her account largely supports the official timeline of a medical emergency. However, it's what she said or didn't say in the years prior that fuel speculation. One of the most famous and controversial quotes attributed to her comes from an earlier period. She allegedly told an author or journalist that Elvis had a plan. He was going to a high, better place. When asked what she meant, she supposedly replied, "He didn't mean heaven." This quote has become legendary in the conspiracy community. It's taken as a direct admission from the last person to see him that he wasn't dying, he was leaving. He had a plan to disappear, and he had confided in her. Furthermore, her demeanor and statements in the immediate aftermath of his death were analyzed. Some found her to be surprisingly composed. There were also inconsistencies between her story and the accounts of others who were at Graceland that day. These small discrepancies were seized upon by researchers who believed she was part of the plan. Her role would have been to be the discoverer, to find the buddy at the right time and to sound the alarm, setting the official narrative in motion. In her book, Alden directly addresses and denies many of the conspiracy theories. She is firm that Elvis died that day and that the experience was a horrific trauma for her. She describes the conspiracy theories as hurtful and disrespectful to his memory. She claims the quote about him going to a better place is a complete fabrication. She presents herself as a grieving partner, not a co-conspirator. So, who do you believe? Skeptics say that Alden is a credible witness and that her book finally sets the record straight. They argue that she was a young woman thrust into an unimaginable situation and that her words have been twisted over the years by sensationalists to fit a narrative. They believe her account of finding his body is the tragic and simple truth. But for the believers, her later denials are just part of the plan. Of course, she would deny it. She is protecting the secret. They believe her earlier. Alleged statements are the real truth. A slip-up before the official story was solidified. They see her as the keeper of the flame, the one person who knows for sure because she was the last one with him. Her role was to be the final witness to the life of Elvis Presley and the first witness to his grand disappearance. If the famous quote attributed to her was a complete fabrication, why has it persisted for so long and been so central to the theory? Could her initial composure have been a state of profound shock rather than the calm of someone executing a plan? And if she was part of a conspiracy, what would motivate a young woman to participate in such a massive deception and maintain the lie for her entire life? Number one, was the man in the casket an imposter? This is the heart of the matter, the single question upon which everything else rests. Was the man lying in that 900-pound copper casket truly Elvis Presley? Many people who knew him best, who saw him in that casket with their own eyes, had their doubts. The theory is that the body on display was not Elvis, but a body double, an impersonator perhaps who had passed away and was used as a stand-in. This would explain all the physical anomalies, the waxy skin, the sweaty appearance, the different-looking nose and eyebrows. It wasn't a wax dummy, it was a real but different person. This would also explain why so many friends and family members reportedly whispered that it didn't look like him. Who would have said such a thing? Dee Presley, who was once married to Elvis's father Vernon, has stated in interviews that she did not believe the body was Elvis. She knew him well, and she felt certain it was not him. Others in the inner circle have been reported to have similar doubts, though many have since denied it. Even his cousin Billy Smith, who was a pallbearer, was said to have had a moment of doubt, a feeling that something was off. Then there is the physical evidence of Elvis himself in the days leading up to his death. He had seen a dentist on the morning of August 16th to have a temporary crown fitted. He was photographed coming back to Graceland. He looked like his usual bloated self. The body in the casket, to some, looked slimmer. His hands did not look like the hands of a man who practiced karate for years. They looked soft and smooth. One of his sideburns was allegedly loose, as if it were part of a disguise. This theory of a body double is perhaps the most elaborate and cinematic. It requires a conspiracy of immense proportions. It means that someone had to find a recently deceased man who bore a strong resemblance to Elvis, get access to his body, and substitute it for the real living Elvis. It's a plot straight out of a spy novel. The official story is that the body was, of course, Elvis. The people who doubted what they saw were in a state of shock and grief. It is common for loved ones to look different in death, especially after an autopsy and the embalming process. The body can become bloated or discolored. The features can seem distorted. The doubters were seeing what they wanted to see, or their grief was playing tricks on their eyes. The people closest to him, including his father Vernon and his ex-wife Priscilla, never publicly expressed any doubt that the man in the casket was Elvis. But the seed of doubt remains. If it was a double, it would solve every puzzle. It would explain the flawed autopsy, the sealed casket, the wrong middle name, the strange behavior of the family. It would be the linchpin of the entire operation. It is the ultimate claim that the funeral itself, the global moment of mourning, was based on a lie, centered around the body of a stranger. If a body double was used, who was he and where did he come from? How could conspirators ensure that the double's own family wouldn't come forward and identify him? And ultimately, if the man in the grave at Graceland is not Elvis Presley, then who is he? And does he have a name of his own, lost to history in service of the world's greatest disappearing act?